Well, here we go with another response video, and once again I'm probably going to need to start with a couple of disclaimers. Firstly, I don't really dislike this video. I actually think it's really well made in terms of editing, writing, and structure. So many times people will make just general statements about things without giving any examples, or they will just rant endlessly and I lose track of what they're even talking about, or I simply can't follow what their problem even is. But with this video, I can completely understand why he feels this way about Mabel. I can even follow every point he makes quite easily. I don't agree with what he's saying, hence this video, but I completely understand it. So please, if you found this video through his channel, don't think this is an attack on CC West. I think he's an awesome guy. Second, I know there is already a response to this video, which I think is right on the money. I actually held off on making this video because a lot of what I'm going to say here was also said in that video. However, I feel I have even more to say about this video, but I may end up repeating a lot of what Cartoon Shy, hope I'm saying that right by the way, has already said. Okay, let's get started. First of all, just a personal issue, I don't really like video titles like that. They just give away the person's feelings before you've even clicked. I feel like most people that like Mabel probably just won't click on it simply because of the title. So as a result, you are basically just preaching to the choir. Maybe this video was kind of guilty of the same thing, but given the video it's response to, that was kind of unavoidable. I'm just going to skip the opening as it's mostly just talk about the show in general, although this part puzzled me. Why even show the awards if you don't feel they're important? It's just the basic disclaimer for people that don't understand that the reason people are critical of shows they like is because they like them, and they want them to be as good as they can possibly be. He then makes a basic opening statement about how he feels about Mabel, which he goes into more detail later. However, there is one interesting thing he says here.
She never grew out of her awful behavior.
Ignoring for the moment the question of if her behavior was really awful, I think this is true. If there was one clear shortcoming with the show, it was the lack of any real growth in any of the main characters. Dipper, Mabel, Stan, and Zeus are all pretty much the same people at the end of the show that they were at the start. The only real arc that any of them go through is just the situation they are put in. I'm not saying they are bad characters, just ones that happen to not have much growth during the series. He then summarizes the 4 basic issues he has with Mabel. The first 2 I can't really talk about until he gets into specific incidences, but I think I can address number 3 right now. Keep in mind, she was an emotional wreck at the time. She thought that was Blendin, a guy she trusts, and she didn't know what that thing was. If she had known what it was, there's no way she'd have given it to him. Is there really any logical reason for her to assume that that thing might be dangerous? Much less that giving it to Blendin would be dangerous. So now let's get into the real meat of the video.
Point number 1. Mabel was consistently unfair towards Dipper. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. The teasing. Mabel constantly teased and made fun of Dipper, and more than once did it get to the point where his feelings were clearly hurt, yet she kept going. In Dipper vs. Manliness, she insults his masculinity.
She's his sister, isn't that kind of a given? Plus, you even play a clip where you can clearly see Stan making fun of him as well. Are you saying it's okay for Stan to do that, but not Mabel? Also, in the case of Dipper vs. Manliness, he kind of brought that on himself by claiming he could beat that machine and then failing miserably.
In Little Dipper, she makes fun of his height.
Again, Zeus and Stan were doing that too.
He makes fun of his voice.
Again, Wendy and Zeus are doing that too. You can even see that in the clip you are playing. In fact, Zeus is probably the bigger offender here because he's the one playing the tape. Also, she says at the end of the tape that his voice is one of a kind, and that convinces Dipper to keep it the way it is.
Those 3 times, the whole rest of the plot of the episode hinged on Dipper getting insecure and trying to fix those things.
Okay, this part is a little harder to address since I'm not sure what the point is here. Does he take issue with the fact that Mabel's actions helped serve the plot? Surely that's a good thing.
But she's only 12. Yeah, well, so is Dipper, and look at how mature he is throughout the series. And more importantly, age doesn't excuse anyone from being an unsatisfying character.
Different people will mature faster than others. If anything, it's a good thing that Dipper is more mature than her. It would be a boring show if both the main characters were the same. If anything, Dipper's maturity and therefore less childlike personality is one thing I didn't like about the series when I first started watching it. He seemed a bit bland and not much like a kid. Mabel is the main thing that drew me into the show because she felt like a real kid. As for her being an unsatisfying character, Is that really what she became for you, just because she made fun of Dipper a few times?
There are a lot of specific times where Mabel has asked or forced Dipper to make huge sacrifices for her, and rarely ever gave anything back to him.
Okay, this is something he does throughout the video that did start to annoy me after a while. He emphasizes certain words and chooses certain adjectives that make it sound like what Mabel is doing is really worse than it actually is. Also, this one instance where Mabel does make a pretty big sacrifice for Dipper is kind of a culmination of all the times Dipper has done that for her. Bill Cipher even acknowledges this as a way to manipulate Dipper into agreeing to make a deal with him.
What's your sister done for you lately? How many times have you sacrificed for her, huh? And when has she ever returned the favor?
Don't you think if the show's main antagonist is pointing something out, or suggesting a certain way of thinking in order to manipulate someone into doing the wrong thing, then maybe we should consider the possibility that it might not be true?
In Hand That Rocks the Mabel, she jeopardizes Dipper and eventually the rest of the family by not breaking up with Gideon herself.
Well, a lot of that is because of the pressure the other people in the restaurant put on her. Also, it's not like she wasn't aware that she needed to break up with him. She just couldn't bring herself to do it because she wanted to remain friends with him, and she thought breaking up with him would hurt him too much. It almost seems like he's saying she's terrible for not wanting to hurt a person's feelings. Let's not forget Stan telling her that she had to marry him to ensure his partnership with Bud.
Gideon only goes nuts because he thought Dipper was lying to him.
The thing is, she didn't even ask Dipper to tell Gideon for her. He offered to do it.
Had Mabel just done it herself, who knows how differently things would have gone with Gideon.
I don't see any reason to think Gideon wouldn't have still gone nuts if Mabel had been the one to tell him. Plus, she didn't know Gideon was going to react that way. He even points out Dipper's body language being a factor. How exactly is that Mabel's fault?
In Time Traveler's Pig, she tries to forcibly take the time tool from Dipper, resulting in them traveling to the past, which she then proceeds to purposefully try and mess with.
All of that is because she lost her pig and she's mad at Dipper for losing it.
Later in the episode, she guilts Dipper into sacrificing his happiness with Wendy so that she can get Waddles back.
That's only after a lot of convincing that the pig really did mean a lot to her. Dipper even says to her, "You're not guilt-tripping me" at first, but after seeing how upset she really is, only then does he fix things. Also, she's extremely grateful to him for it, and as thanks, has Waddles trick Robbie in front of Wendy to make him feel better.
Was there seriously no other cooler in the whole town big enough for her to use? She had to steal the one at the pool?
There probably was, but keep in mind, Mamando can't leave the pool without the cooler. So any cooler she finds somewhere else, which by the way she would probably still have had to steal, would have had to have been carried to the pool. Using the one at the pool saves her having to do that.
And she couldn't have just told Dipper, "I just need it for a quick drive, I'll bring it right back"?
I find it hard to believe that telling him would have convinced him to let her take it. Dipper even asks later on, "What do you even need it for?" Don't forget, she does tell him the truth at the lake, but I guess she could have told him that a bit sooner. Maybe she just didn't want to humiliate Mamando, or maybe the writers wanted to give us a cool chase scene. I'll admit, this decision to not tell Dipper what she's up to is a little harder to defend, but this show would be boring if all the characters were perfect.
Also, she convinces Dipper to give Mermando mouth-to-mouth, then takes a picture of it for blackmail.
I think Dipper is just as much at fault here for choosing to do this in the first place. The blackmail line was just a quick throwaway joke that emphasizes the sibling rivalry between the two. Are you kidding me? I loved that moment with the megaphone. A beautiful sign of the sibling love between the two. She's just kind of overexcited in that moment because she's just learned what the flashlight can do and wants to use it. Think of it as a form of play fighting.
In Sock Opera, Mabel refuses to help Dipper with the laptop because of yet another vain crush. And she doesn't just let him work on it himself. Oh no. She guilts him into helping her with the puppet show instead.
No, she doesn't refuse to help. What she actually said was, the only guilt tripping involved might be the puppy dog eyes she makes. Also, keep in mind the puppet show was something she had to get ready by Friday. The laptop, on the other hand, could probably wait. Plus, once he agrees, she hugs him, thanks him, and yells to the library as a whole,
She only turns around to selflessness once Bill guilts her into it, which is pretty messed up.
well, I think you're overlooking what she really does to help Dipper out here. not to mention tricking Bill into leaving his body.
But it gets even worse because later in Weirdmageddon 2, Escape from Reality, she throws Dipper's unconditional support for her back in his face when she creates Dippy Fresh.
You do realize that that's supposed to be seen as a bad thing, and she figures out by the end of the episode that she was wrong. If anything, it emphasizes how much her brother means to her. She wants him to support her, and it crushes her that he's not willing to do that. Obviously, the way she deals with the situation isn't right, but that's the idea, and she learns that by the end.
With her reaction to Ford offering Dipper the apprenticeship. Dipper is getting a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to step up the ante to somewhere he never would have dreamed. Dipper's apprenticeship with Ford could literally change the course of human history.
I think you're overblowing the importance of Dipper's apprenticeship. It wasn't a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He will get the chance again. Ford might change the world, I guess, but he could do that even without Dipper.
Instead of being proud or excited for Dipper, she's sad and jealous and vulnerable.
Firstly, I don't think Mabel ever said that she's jealous of Dipper. Anyway, keep in mind that the day she finds this out, Mabel has already been told by Wendy how awful being a teenager is, and that neither Candy or Grenda will be at her birthday party. Then, to try and make her feel better, Stan reminds her that Dipper will still be there for her to help her through things. Dipper even says in the episode that they've never really been apart. Dipper leaving is a pretty big change in her life, so to be given that news on top of the other things she's found out that day, I think her reaction is quite understandable. It's not right, but it is understandable.
Is she really so horrible that she would deny Dipper his potential destiny as a world-saving hero just so that she could keep him in this abusive, parasitic relationship?
Can you really be more manipulative and obvious with the way you are talking right now? Again, slightly overblowing the importance of the apprenticeship, I think. And abusive relationship is going way too far. If Dipper really thought he was being abused, he would have at least told her as much.
But it's not just Dipper that she's awful towards. In fact, some of her most fucked up actions have been towards other people. Friends, family, relatives, strangers, she constantly puts people in mortal peril or ignores their free will for whatever whimsy she has on her mind that day.
Okay, so the examples he's showing here are things he will go into more detail about later on, so I'll cover each one as he comes to it.
Starting with the mortal peril bit, in Into the Bunker, she causes their little group to scramble for their lives not once, but twice.
Wasn't that kind of need to happen in a lot of cases in order to give us a story?
The first time sort of through accident, but the second time entirely intentionally. And her reasoning is because she thinks Dipper will be happier if he confesses to Wendy.
Okay, the first time it's actually Dipper that triggers the trap. You even play the clip showing that. Okay, Mabel is the one that bumps him on the back, but it's not her fault Dipper is so clumsy that he nearly fell over because of a small bump on the back. At the very least, you have to fault Dipper just as much as Mabel for the first one. The second one is because Dipper refuses to tell Wendy how he feels about her, and she knows Dipper will feel better once he does so. It becomes clear that the only way she's going to get him to do that is if he's forced to. Plus, like with the first trap, Dipper is just as much at fault here for not just simply telling Wendy how he feels. Some might argue she's being a bit too pushy, but I think that's just the dynamic of being brother and sister. You can do certain things to them that might be seen as a bit much with anyone else, but with siblings, you just kind of know they will be okay with it in the end.
So even though Dipper told her that he didn't want to, her response is to lock him in a closet with Wendy until he does what she thinks is best.
The reason she locked him in is because he told her he didn't want to. Like I said, it's pretty clear that he's only going to do it if he's forced to. Also, what she thinks is best? Are you saying you don't think this is best? You think Dipper is better off just acting awkward around Wendy for the rest of the summer? All I can think is that you've never had a crush in your life and therefore have no idea what it's like.
Then, while both he and Wendy are in there pleading for their life, she still won't let them out.
She thought he was joking. She even says that later on, and she feels bad when she finds out he wasn't. Not to mention, Dipper still refuses to tell Wendy even when the monster shows up. So again, isn't he just as much at fault here?